My name is Audrey, 33 years old, and until recently, my family thought I was just a struggling florist who decorated cheap events. They had no idea I was actually the founder and CEO of Apex Hospitality Group. My sister sent a group text demanding I wire her $15,000 for her daughter's Sweet 16, attaching photos of a luxury venue, a custom dress, and a $1,000 cake. I texted back 3 simple words: get a job. 15 minutes later, my father called screaming that I needed to pay up or I was no longer part of the family. He ordered me to a fancy steakhouse to apologize. Instead, I showed up, paid the bill, and made one phone call that completely dismantled their lives. By the next morning, they were facing financial ruin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled relatives who treat you like their personal bank account. The chaos started on a Tuesday morning with the aggressive buzzing of my phone against the kitchen counter. I was barely halfway through my coffee when notifications from our family group chat started rolling in. My older sister Melanie, who is 36 and treats everyday life like a reality television show, was bombarding the chat. First came a picture of a massive 5-tier cake covered in edible gold flakes. Next was a photo of a custom crystal-beaded gown that looked more appropriate for a red carpet gala than a teenager's birthday. Finally, she sent a promotional image of the Grand Astoria, the most exclusive event venue on the East Coast. Melanie was planning a Sweet 16 for her daughter Brianna, and she wanted everyone to know it was going to be the social event of the year. My parents, William and Diane, immediately chimed in with a flood of heart emojis. My mother gushed about how perfect the venue was, while my father bragged about how his granddaughter deserved nothing but the best. I watched the screen silently, knowing exactly where this performance was heading. Melanie had not worked a single day in her life. She married young, lived in a suburban mansion she could not afford, and spent her days trying to impress wealthy neighbors. I, on the other hand, was the family scapegoat. Because I worked in the event industry and wore practical clothes, they assumed I was a struggling manual laborer. They constantly mocked my lifestyle, claiming I lacked ambition because I was not married to a corporate executive. Then the inevitable demand popped up on the screen. Melanie tagged me directly. "Audrey," she wrote, "I need you to wire $15,000 to my account by 5 o'clock this afternoon. You do not have a husband or kids to drain your bank account, so you can finally do something useful for once and fund your niece's party. Consider it your duty as an aunt." I stared at the screen, letting the sheer audacity of her demand wash over me. She was not asking for a favor. She was issuing a command, fully expecting me to drain my supposed life savings to pay for a party I was not even formally invited to attend. In the past, I might have felt a twinge of guilt. I might have drafted a long, apologetic paragraph explaining that I could not afford it. But those days were over. I set my coffee mug down. I did not feel hurt. I felt a cold, sharp sense of clarity. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I did not type a paragraph. I did not offer an explanation or an apology. I simply sent 3 words: get a job. The response was instantaneous. The group chat exploded. Melanie fired back a barrage of angry emojis and all caps messages, calling me a selfish, bitter spinster. My mother typed out a massive block of text about how I was ruining a beautiful family moment with my toxic jealousy. I tossed my phone onto the sofa, ignoring the endless vibration. I knew exactly what would happen next. Exactly 15 minutes later, my phone began ringing loudly. It was my father, William. I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone. Before I could even say hello, his voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with rage. "You disrespectful brat!" he screamed, his voice carrying the familiar tone of absolute authority he used to control our family. "How dare you speak to your sister that way? Melanie is trying to create a magical memory for Brianna, and you are acting like a greedy, selfish child." I kept my voice perfectly level. "She demanded $15,000, Dad. I am not funding a party she cannot afford." William scoffed loudly. "You are single and you arrange flowers for a living. What else are you spending your money on? You should be honored that your sister is allowing you to contribute to this family. You listen to me very carefully, Audrey. You will pay up by tonight, or you are no longer a part of this family. I will not tolerate this kind of blatant disrespect. You are going to get yourself to the Oakbrook Steakhouse at 7 o'clock tonight, and you are going to apologize to Melanie in person. Bring your checkbook. He slammed the phone down. Silence returned to my apartment feeling heavy and thick. A few short years ago, a threat like that would have sent me into a panic. But as I stood there in the quiet of my home, I did not cry. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across my face. I walked over to my closet and pulled out my coat. If they wanted a family dinner at a luxury steakhouse, I would give them one. I grabbed my keys, ready to face the firing squad. The drive to Oakbrook Steakhouse took 20 minutes. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant. The air inside smelled of roasted meats, aged wine, and old money. It was the kind of place my family frequented when they wanted to feel important, surrounded by dim lighting and leather booths. The hostess led me to a private dining alcove in the back. As I rounded the corner, I saw them. My parents, William and Diane, were seated on one side of a long oak table. Opposite them sat my sister Melanie and her husband Kendrick. Empty plates streaked with steak sauce and half-empty wine glasses littered the table. They had already eaten. They had ordered the most expensive items on the menu, indulged in top-tier Cabernet, and had their desserts cleared away before I arrived. They never had any intention of having a family dinner with me. This was an ambush. I pulled out an empty chair at the end of the table and sat down. The silence was thick and suffocating. Diane narrowed her eyes, glaring at me with the absolute disdain she usually reserved for people she deemed beneath her. She adjusted her silk scarf and let out a sharp sigh of disapproval. Before anyone could offer a greeting, Kendrick leaned forward. Kendrick was a 39-year-old finance director. He wore a tailored navy suit and kept his posture rigid, projecting the image of a Wall Street titan. In reality, he was drowning in credit card debt to keep up with Melanie's spending habits. He picked up the leather check presenter resting in the center of the table and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped right in front of me. I glanced down. The total glowing at the bottom of the receipt was $840. Pay the tab, florist. Kendrick sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Consider it an apology fee for your disrespect earlier today. When Melanie and I had our $100,000 wedding, William and Diane had to mortgage their house to cover it because you refused to contribute a single dime. You play with flowers for a living. You should be grateful we even let you sit at this table. His words hung in the air, a perfect summary of exactly how this family viewed me. 5 years ago, when Melanie demanded a royal wedding she could not afford, my parents had bankrolled the entire circus. They took out a second mortgage on their home, plunging themselves into debt just to keep up appearances. They had demanded I hand over my savings to help pay for the floral arrangements. When I refused, choosing instead to invest that money into my first business venture, I was permanently branded the selfish sister. They genuinely believed I spent my days sweeping up petals in a retail shop. They had no idea my floral arrangements were actually corporate contracts, or that my little flower business had evolved into the Apex Hospitality Group. I looked around the table. Melanie was smirking, twirling a diamond ring around her finger, waiting for me to break down. My father, William, sat back with his arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. They expected me to panic. They expected me to stare at the $800 bill and beg for forgiveness, or perhaps cry about how I could not afford my rent if I paid it. Instead, I reached into my designer handbag, which I had carefully positioned out of their line of sight. I pulled out my wallet and extracted a solid black obsidian metal credit card. The heavy metal caught the dim light of the chandelier above us. I placed the card on top of the receipt and pushed the leather folder toward the edge of the table just as the waiter stepped into the alcove. The waiter picked up the folder, felt the unmistakable weight of the exclusive invitation-only card, and immediately stood up straighter. "I will take care of this for you right away, ma'am," he said with a polite bow, scurrying off to run the charge. Kendrick blinked, his arrogant expression faltering for a fraction of a second. He recognized the type of card I had just handed over. It was not a card issued to struggling retail workers, But his fragile ego quickly overrode his common sense, and he masked his brief confusion with another dismissive scoff. I kept my posture completely relaxed, casually folding my hands on the table. I looked Kendrick dead in the eye, holding his gaze until he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I will pay for the steak, Kendrick," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "But I am not funding a teenage vanity project for a sister who has not worked a single day in her entire life." The reaction was explosive. Melanie gasped loudly, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Within seconds, her face crumpled, and she forced loud, dramatic sobs, burying her face in her hands. It was an impressive theatrical performance, complete with trembling shoulders and fake tears. Diane rushed to comfort her, wrapping her arms around Melanie and glaring daggers at me. The loud crack echoed through the private alcove, drawing the attention of guests in the main dining room. He stood up, towering over the table, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. He was breathing heavily, furious that his intimidation tactics had failed and that I had openly defied them all. He leaned forward, preparing to drop a massive threat that he believed would destroy my life and force me into absolute submission. The crystal water glasses vibrated against the table as William shot up from his chair. His sudden movement knocked his linen napkin onto the floor and caused the couple at the adjacent table to stop mid-conversation. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, his skin flushed a deep mottled red. "You ungrateful parasite!" His voice carried across the hushed dining room, sharp and furious. "You think a black credit card makes you special. You think you can sit here and disrespect your sister after everything this family has done for you." I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded on the table. "What exactly have you done for me, William?" He slammed his fist down again. "I put a roof over your head. You currently rent an apartment in the building I own. I gave you a place to live when your little flower shop was barely scraping by. If that $15,000 is not in Melanie's account by midnight, I am terminating your lease. I will personally go over there tomorrow morning and throw your cheap vases and whatever else you own out onto the street. Do not test me, Audrey. You will be homeless before the weekend." Melanie sniffled into her napkin, peeking out just enough to see my reaction. She was waiting for me to beg. She was waiting for the familiar panic that used to consume me whenever my father threatened my basic survival. Before I could speak, Diane leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands resting on the edge of the table. She looked at me not with a mother's concern, but with cold, calculated disappointment. "Your father refused to co-sign your college loans when you were 18, so you would learn independence." Diane's voice was quiet, but it carried the same venom as my father's shouting. "We let you struggle so you would understand the value of a dollar. We taught you how to survive. And this is how you repay our tough love. By humiliating your sister over a birthday party. By parading around some flashy credit card you probably maxed out just to make us look bad." The sheer delusion in her words was breathtaking. I looked at the three of them. My father panting with rage, my mother radiating toxic self-righteousness, and my sister hiding behind a veil of fake tears. They actually believed they still held the reins to my life. They were clinging to an outdated narrative where I was the helpless, struggling disappointment who needed their scraps to survive. They did not know that the tough love my mother just praised was the exact reason I learned how to build a corporate empire from the ground up. When they refused to co-sign my loans, I worked 3 jobs and graduated debt-free. When they laughed at my first business plan, I found private investors. I built Apex Hospitality Group with my own bare hands, turning a small floral and event planning service into a multi-million-dollar conglomerate that acquired venues across the entire eastern seaboard. And they thought I was afraid of an eviction notice. I slowly pushed my chair back and stood up. I smoothed the front of my coat, taking a moment to look down at William. He was expecting a frantic apology. He was expecting me to pull out my phone and transfer the funds to Melanie right then and there. Instead, I offered him a calm, pitying smile. "You do not own me, William." I kept my voice low, forcing him to strain to hear me over the background noise of the restaurant. "And you definitely do not own my apartment anymore." William frowned, his aggressive posture faltering for a split second. What kind of nonsense are you talking about? I own that entire complex. You did, I corrected smoothly. You owned it until you defaulted on the commercial mortgage 6 months ago. You have been ignoring the bank notices hoping a miracle would save you. But the bank sold your debt at auction last week to a corporate holding firm. You are no longer the landlord, William. You are just a disgraced property manager who is about to be audited. The color completely drained from his face. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her throat as she looked at her husband for confirmation. The sudden silence at our table was deafening. Melanie dropped her napkin, the fake tears instantly replaced by genuine confusion. What does she mean, Dad? Melanie demanded, her voice shrill. What bank notices? William opened his mouth, but no words came out. His absolute control over the conversation was gone. The grand illusion of his wealth, the same wealth he used to threaten and belittle me for my entire adult life, had just shattered in the middle of a crowded steakhouse. I picked up my purse and looked at Kendrick, who was staring at me with wide, calculating eyes. Thanks for dinner, Kendrick. I suggest you check your own financial statements before you start writing checks for Sweet 16 parties. I turned my back on them and walked away. I did not run. I did not look over my shoulder. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had just reclaimed her entire life. The maitre d' opened the heavy mahogany door for me, and I stepped out into the crisp, freezing night air. The cold hit my face, but I had never felt warmer. My pulse was steady. My mind was sharp. The decades of belittlement, the constant financial threats, the endless comparisons to a sister who contributed absolutely nothing to the world, it was all finally over. I had given them a chance to treat me like family, and they had chosen to treat me like a bank. I walked down the illuminated sidewalk toward my car. I stopped under the glow of a street lamp. I pulled out my phone. It was time to make the call. The freezing wind whipped across the restaurant parking lot, but I barely felt it. My heart beat with a steady, rhythmic thrum of adrenaline. For years I had shrunk myself to fit into their narrow, suffocating box. I had worn cheap clothes to family events to avoid their probing questions, and let them believe their financial superiority gave them the right to treat me like dirt. That charade ended tonight. I reached my car, a custom-imported sedan, that I deliberately parked 3 blocks away to avoid my father's eagle eyes, and unlocked it with a press of a button. Slipping into the driver's seat, I enjoyed the absolute quiet of the insulated cabin. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed Marcus, the chief operating officer of Apex Hospitality Group. He answered on the second ring. Audrey. It is late. Is everything all right? He asked. His voice was sharp and alert. Everything is perfect, Marcus, I replied, staring out at the frost gathering on the windshield. I need you to pull up the upcoming reservations for the Grand Astoria. Look for a Suite 16 booking under the name Melanie Adams. I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end. Found it. The event is scheduled for next weekend. It is a massive package, custom catering, the grand ballroom, the works. What do you need? I leaned back against the headrest. Cancel it. Cancel the entire Adams family booking. Marcus paused for a fraction of a second. Cancel it completely. We have a $25,000 deposit on file for that event. I took a slow, deep breath, relishing the weight of the words I was about to say. Yes, cancel it completely. The official reason is suspected credit card fraud and a severe breach of contract. I want you to freeze the deposit immediately. Do not refund a single dime until our legal team conducts a full review of the transaction history. And Marcus, yes, Audrey, flag the primary account holder across all our subsidiary companies. Make sure William, Diane, Melanie, and Kendrick cannot book a single venue, caterer, or hotel owned by Apex Hospitality ever again. Understood. I am initiating the cancellation protocol right now, he said. The event manager will reach out to them first thing tomorrow morning to deliver the news. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. My father had given me an ultimatum. My sister had demanded my hard-earned money to fund her pathetic social climbing. My brother-in-law had insulted my entire existence. They wanted to see what would happen if I did not comply by midnight. Tomorrow morning they were going to find out exactly who they had been messing with all these years. I started the engine, pulling out into the empty street, leaving the Oakbrook Steakhouse and my toxic family far behind me in the rearview mirror. At 7:40 the next morning, the pristine silence of Melanie and Kendrick's suburban McMansion shattered. The harsh, relentless ringing of a cell phone echoed through their master bedroom. Melanie groaned, swatting at the designer comforter before grabbing the device from her nightstand. She answered without looking at the caller ID, expecting it to be the party planner confirming the ice sculpture delivery. Instead, a brisk professional voice greeted her. "Good morning, Mrs. Adams. This is Sarah, the senior event director at the Grand Astoria. I am calling to inform you that your booking for next weekend has been officially canceled." Melanie sat bolt upright in bed, the remnants of sleep vanishing instantly. "What are you talking about? You cannot cancel my event. I have 300 guests coming. The invitations are already out." "I am afraid the decision is final," Sarah replied, her tone completely devoid of customer service warmth. "Our corporate office flagged your account at midnight. Your $25,000 deposit has been frozen, our catering team has been pulled, and you are no longer permitted on the premises." Melanie gripped the phone, her knuckles turning white. "Frozen. You cannot freeze my money. I demand to speak to your manager. I will ruin you. I will have your job for this." "You can speak to our legal department," Sarah responded coldly. "The cancellation is due to suspected credit card fraud and breach of contract. Any further communication must go through our corporate attorneys. Have a nice day." The line went dead. Melanie let out a blood-curdling scream and hurled her phone across the room. It smashed against the custom vanity mirror, cracking the glass. The bedroom door burst open and Kendrick rushed in, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. "What is wrong with you?" Kendrick yelled, staring at the shattered mirror. "Why are you screaming like a lunatic?" "My party," Melanie wailed, burying her face in her hands. "The Grand Astoria just called. They canceled the Sweet 16. They pulled the caterers and they froze the deposit." Kendrick froze in his tracks. He stared at his wife, his mind racing to comprehend the words she had just spoken. "They froze the deposit. Why would a venue accuse us of fraud? We paid them." Melanie sobbed harder, refusing to meet his eyes. "It must be Audrey. She must have called her cheap florist friends and told them to ruin my reputation." Kendrick ignored her hysterical crying. His finance background immediately kicked in. A venue like the Grand Astoria did not casually throw around accusations of fraud, nor did they freeze massive deposits without a paper trail. His heart hammered against his ribs as a sickening realization washed over him. He pulled his own phone from his pocket and with trembling fingers opened his primary banking app. He waited for the screen to load, silently praying that this was all a massive misunderstanding. The dashboard finally appeared, but all the color instantly drained from his face. A massive flashing red warning banner stretched across the very top of his screen. Kendrick stared at the flashing red banner across his banking app. The bold letters spelled out a nightmare. "Account suspended. Fraud alert." The phone trembled in his palm. For a man managing wealth, his credit score was his most prized possession. It was his shield, allowing him to project the image of a titan. He tapped the screen, hoping it was a glitch. The banner remained. His available balance showed 0. His credit line was locked. He dialed the number on the back of his card, mashing the 0 key until transferred to a human representative. Melanie sat on the edge of the bed, wailing about the ruined party and shattered mirror. The sound grated against his nerves. "Good morning, Mr. Adams. This is David from Fraud Prevention. I see you are calling regarding the lock on your accounts." "Unlock them immediately," Kendrick snapped, pacing the bedroom and ignoring his wife. "I have a mortgage payment scheduled. There has been a massive error. I am a finance director. My credit score is impeccable." "I apologize, Mr. Adams, but the lock was generated by our security matrix," the representative stated with corporate calm. At 3 o'clock this morning, a secondary cardholder initiated a massive chargeback for a $25,000 transaction to the Grand Astoria. Kendrick stopped pacing. The blood rushed out of his head, leaving him dizzy. He turned slowly to look at Melanie, completely oblivious to the conversation happening 5 feet away. A chargeback. Kendrick repeated, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Yes, sir. The vendor. The Grand Astoria formally flagged the transaction for fraud and breach of contract, submitting evidence that the booking was invalid. Because the secondary cardholder attempted to claw the money back, our system flagged the profile for suspected wire fraud. All assets associated with your Social Security number have been frozen pending federal review. Kendrick could not breathe. A federal review meant his firm would be notified. Finding out his assets were frozen for suspected wire fraud meant immediate termination. His entire career was vaporized in a single phone call. He ended the call without saying another word. He dropped the phone onto the carpet and took 2 steps toward his wife, his fists clenched tight. What did you do? Kendrick roared, his voice shaking the framed pictures on the bedroom wall. Melanie flinched, mascara running down her cheeks. What do you mean, what did I do? Audrey ruined my party. She canceled the venue. I am talking about the $25,000. Kendrick leaned over her. The bank locked every single account we have. They are investigating us for wire fraud. You initiated a chargeback on a $25,000 deposit to the Grand Astoria. I told you we did not have the cash for this circus. Our credit cards are maxed out. Where did you get $25,000? Melanie shrank back against the headboard, looking for an escape route. She wrapped her silk robe tighter around her body, suddenly looking very small. I had to secure the grand ballroom. She stammered, her voice pitching into a defensive whine. Brianna already told all her friends at her private school that she was having the event of the season. I could not let her look like a fool. Where did you get the money? Melanie Kendrick demanded, stepping closer. I took a loan against your retirement account, she blurted out, squeezing her eyes shut. I forged your signature on the forms and pulled $25,000 from your 401k. Kendrick felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the bedpost to keep from collapsing. His retirement, the only untouchable asset he had left. The money he had been guarding to ensure he did not end up destitute when the house of cards fell. She had raided it for a party. You stole from my retirement, Kendrick choked out, staring at her like a stranger. You committed identity theft for a teenager's birthday party, then tried to initiate a fraudulent chargeback. I had to, she wailed, throwing her hands up. Audrey refused to give me the $15,000. If she had just wired me the money, I could have paid the loan back before you ever noticed. This is her fault, Kendrick. She is ruining our lives. Kendrick stared at the woman he married. The sheer entitlement and detachment from reality was nauseating. He had spent years indulging her delusions of grandeur, covering up her financial incompetence, and playing the wealthy executive. Now he was facing federal fraud charges because she wanted a crystal gown for a 16-year-old. I am done, Kendrick said, his voice eerily calm. What do you mean you are done? Melanie asked, scrambling off the bed. We need to call my father. William will fix this. He always fixes this. Your father cannot fix a federal banking freeze. He turned his back on her, walking toward the closet. He grabbed his leather briefcase and shoved his laptop inside. He needed to get to the bank, explain the forgery, throw his wife under the bus, and beg them not to report this. Kendrick, where are you going? You cannot leave me here to deal with this, Melanie shrieked, following him out of the bedroom and into the grand hallway. Watch me, Kendrick snapped, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He reached the landing and marched toward the front door, ignoring Melanie's dramatic wails, echoing down the staircase. He grabbed his car keys from the console table. He had to get ahead of this. He threw open the front door, the crisp morning air rushing into the foyer. He took 1 step onto the portico and froze. His heart stopped. Pulling into their driveway were 2 black and white police cruisers. Their red and blue lights sliced silently through the suburban morning, reflecting off the manicured hedges. They rolled to a stop, blocking his sedan. 4 officers stepped out and approached the front steps. Kendrick stood frozen in his marble foyer, his hand hovering over the brass doorknob. Through the frosted glass panels, he saw the silhouettes of the officers standing on his front porch. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of his home, broadcasting his sudden downfall to the entire neighborhood. He could already imagine the wealthy housewives next door peering through their custom blinds, ready to gossip. A sharp knock echoed through the house. It was the sound of authority demanding entry. Kendrick swallowed hard, forcing his trembling hand to grip the doorknob and pull the heavy oak door open. Two police officers stood on the welcome mat, their expressions neutral. The taller officer stepped forward, resting his hand on his duty belt. "Are you Kendrick Adams?" he asked, his voice cutting through the crisp morning air. Kendrick nodded, his throat suddenly too dry to form a coherent word. He gripped the handle of his leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles ached. He braced himself for handcuffs. He braced himself for the utter humiliation of being paraded out of his home in front of his judgmental neighbors. "We are not here to arrest you, Mr. Adams," the second officer stated, pulling a manila envelope from a satchel. "We are here to serve you with a formal summons and a notice of civil litigation. You are required to sign acknowledging receipt." Kendrick scrawled his name on the clipboard, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold the pen. As the officers handed him the envelope and returned to their cruisers, Kendrick ripped open the seal. The documents were printed on heavy paper bearing the embossed logo of Apex Hospitality Group. The Grand Astoria was a flagship property owned by a massive corporate conglomerate. The legal notice outlined a catastrophic series of events. Apex Hospitality Group maintained a strict zero-tolerance policy for financial fraud. Because the fraudulent chargeback had been initiated on a card bearing Kendrick's name, he was legally designated as the primary orchestrator of the theft. The corporation was holding him responsible for the full amount plus punitive damages. His chest tightened. He stumbled backward, dropping his briefcase onto the marble floor. His smartphone vibrated with a sudden aggressive urgency. He looked at the screen. An incoming email marked with high importance from the senior managing partner at his wealth management firm. Kendrick opened the message, scanning the harsh corporate language. The words blurred together, but the main point struck him like a physical blow. The compliance department had been notified by federal authorities regarding a massive fraud alert on his accounts. As a licensed finance director, any implication of financial misconduct violated his contract. He was suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full internal investigation. Kendrick dropped the phone. It clattered against the marble tiles. He backed against the wall, clutching his chest as dizziness washed over him. He was hyperventilating. His pristine credit score, his lucrative career, his flawless reputation in the financial sector, everything he had built his entire life upon was gone. It had been incinerated in 30 minutes. Melanie scrambled down the grand staircase. She stared at Kendrick as he gasped for air on the floor. Instead of asking if he was having a medical emergency, she snatched his discarded phone off the tiles. She read the email from his boss, her eyes widening in horror as she realized the money tap was officially shut off. "This cannot be happening," Melanie shrieked. "This is a mistake. I am going to sue that venue. How dare they do this to us over a bank dispute?" Kendrick could not even speak. He just sat there wheezing, staring at the woman who had single-handedly destroyed his life. Melanie pulled her own phone from her pocket, her fingers flying across the keypad. She bypassed her husband completely and dialed her mother. Diane answered on the very first ring. "Mom, you have to help me," Melanie sobbed, launching into a hysterical performance. "The Grand Astoria venue just canceled Brianna's party. They froze our deposit and now Kendrick's firm is suspending him." Diane's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and instantly defensive. "What do you mean they canceled the party? Why would they freeze your money?" "It has to be! Audrey!" Melanie wailed, pacing faster. "Audrey must have called her cheap florist friends and told them to sabotage my event. She is trying to ruin my reputation because I asked her for a tiny favor yesterday. She probably fabricated some lie about our credit cards to get back at me." A heavy, dangerous silence fell over the line. When Diane finally spoke, her voice trembled with an unbridled, aristocratic rage. The absolute audacity of that girl. After everything we have done for her, she uses her pathetic little connections to attack her own family. Brianna is going to be devastated. Her entire high school knows about this party. We are going to be a laughingstock, Mom. Kendrick is just sitting on the floor panicking. He is completely useless. I do not know what to do. You do exactly what I tell you, Diane commanded, her tone turning cold and militant. Get dressed right now. Put on something sharp. You and I are not going to let a glorified flower arranger humiliate this family and jeopardize your husband's career. Get in your car and come to my house immediately. What are we going to do? Melanie asked, a glimmer of vindictive hope returning to her tear-stained face as she listened to her mother's brilliant plan. We are declaring war, Diane snarled. We are driving straight to Audrey's little event planning office. I am going to march right into her building, demand to speak to her supervisor, and I am going to make sure her boss fires her today. She wants to play games with our money. I am going to make sure she never works in this city again. She picked the wrong family to cross. 45 minutes later, William's sleek black luxury SUV pulled up to the curb outside a towering glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of downtown. The gold lettering above the entrance read Apex Hospitality Group. William parked illegally in a loading zone, uncaring of any tickets. He marched toward the revolving doors with Diane, Melanie, and a furious Kendrick flanking him like a royal guard. They were absolutely convinced Audrey was nothing more than a low-level decorator for one of the subsidiary vendors operating out of the basement or a cramped cubicle. They believed she had used a petty vendor login to mess with Melanie's catering order. They pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the sprawling, immaculate lobby. The floors were polished Italian marble, and a massive waterfall wall provided a backdrop for the sleek security desks. Men and women in tailored designer suits walked purposefully across the floor. William ignored the security protocols and marched straight past a velvet rope, leading his angry family directly to the primary reception desk. A young woman with a crisp blazer and a headset looked up, offering a polite professional smile. Good morning, welcome to Apex Hospitality Group. How may I direct you today? William slammed his palm flat against the polished marble counter. The loud smack echoed across the lobby, causing several executives to pause and stare. I do not want to be directed anywhere, William barked. His face flushed red with aristocratic fury. I want to see the CEO in charge here immediately. One of your decorators, a girl named Audrey Adams, is engaged in corporate sabotage against my family. She manipulated a venue booking and triggered a fraudulent bank freeze on my son-in-law. I demand to speak to the person in charge so I can have her terminated this instant. Diane stepped up right next to her husband, glaring at the receptionist. Tell your boss we are the Adams family. We spend thousands of dollars at your venues every year. We will pull every ounce of our business and sue this entire conglomerate into bankruptcy if that little brat is not fired today. The receptionist did not flinch. She did not call for security. She simply maintained her perfectly polite smile and typed a few keystrokes into her sleek computer monitor. Ah, Mr. Adams, she said, her voice entirely devoid of intimidation. Yes, she has been expecting you. You are cleared for access. William puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He turned to Kendrick and Melanie with a triumphant smirk. You see how the real world works? He boasted loudly. Money and influence get things done. That ungrateful girl is about to find her belongings in a cardboard box. Please proceed past the security gates to the private elevator bank on your left, the receptionist instructed, handing William a sleek silver keycard. You will need this to access the executive suite. Please take the private elevator straight up to the 50th floor. Melanie sneered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. They are probably calling her up to the executive suite to humiliate her before they fire her. This is going to be perfect. The four of them marched past the security desk and scanned the silver card. The glass gates chimed and parted, granting them access to a polished steel elevator reserved exclusively for the highest-level executives. They stepped inside the luxurious cabin. William pressed the button for the 50th floor. The elevator shot upward at a breathtaking speed, leaving their stomachs behind. Kendrick leaned against the mirrored wall, his breathing still shallow, holding on to the desperate hope that getting Audrey fired would somehow force the company to drop the fraud charges against him. The elevator slowed and a soft bell chimed. The polished steel doors glided open seamlessly, revealing the penthouse level. The entire floor was a breathtaking monument to immense corporate wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the entire city skyline. Original modern art hung on the pristine white walls. At the end of the wide corridor stood a massive glass-walled boardroom. "Follow me," William commanded, marching down the hall with absolute authority. He reached the heavy glass double doors and pushed them wide open. They stormed into the room ready to demand blood, but instantly froze in their tracks. Their aggressive momentum completely vanished when they saw exactly who was sitting at the head of the table. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind William, sealing the four of them inside the expansive boardroom. At the far end of a huge mahogany table sat three men in tailored suits looking over legal documents. In the center, facing the giant windows that overlooked the city skyline, was a leather executive chair. William cleared his throat, puffing out his chest to project maximum authority. "I am William Adams," he boomed, expecting the men at the table to jump to attention. "I demand to speak to the chief executive officer immediately. I am here to terminate a rogue employee." The three men did not flinch. Instead, the tall leather chair slowly swiveled around. Audrey sat there, her legs crossed, wearing an immaculate slate-gray designer suit. Her expression was completely composed, devoid of the anxiety or submission they were so used to seeing from her. She clasped her hands and rested them on the polished wood. "Welcome to Apex Hospitality Group," Audrey said smoothly, her voice echoing with calm authority across the silent room. "I am the founder and CEO. Which employee did you want to file a complaint against, William?" The silence that fell over the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that precedes a catastrophic collapse. Melanie felt her jaw actually drop, her mouth hanging open as she stared at her sister. Diane blinked rapidly, her aristocratic posture faltering as she looked from Audrey to the imposing men flanked around her, recognizing the undeniable posture of powerful corporate attorneys. Kendrick felt the remaining oxygen leave his lungs. His finance background immediately kicked into overdrive. Apex Hospitality Group was a massive conglomerate. They owned hotels, elite catering companies, and prime real estate across the eastern seaboard. If Audrey was the founder and chief executive officer of this entity, she was not just wealthy. She commanded a net worth that eclipsed William and his entire manufacturing firm by tens of millions of dollars. She was a titan. Kendrick moved his eyes around the luxurious boardroom, taking in the original artwork and custom furnishings, suddenly realizing he was standing in the epicenter of absolute financial dominance. William felt his face flush a deep mottled purple. His mind, rigid and trapped in decades of his own patriarchal superiority, violently rejected the reality in front of him. He pointed a shaking finger at his daughter. "This is a trick!" William spat, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and cognitive dissonance. "You arrange flowers. You are a low-level event planner who lives in a cheap apartment. You do not own this company. Get out of that chair before I call security and have you arrested for trespassing." Audrey did not raise her voice. She did not defend her career or list her accomplishments. Instead, she picked up a thick red stamped folder from the stack in front of her and dropped it onto the glass center of the table. The heavy thud resonated through the room. "I own the venues where the flowers go." "Dad," Audrey stated, her gaze locking onto his and refusing to yield an inch. "I own the florists. I own the catering subsidiaries. I built this empire while you were busy telling everyone I was a disappointment. But we are not here to discuss my portfolio. And right now we need to talk about the felonies your golden child just committed." Melanie took a step backward, bumping into Kendrick. "I did not commit any felonies," she shrieked, her voice shrill and defensive. "You ruined my party. You froze our bank accounts. You are trying to destroy my life because you have always been jealous of me." The man seated to the right of Audrey stood up. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Melanie with the clinical detachment of a predator analyzing prey. "I am Marcus Thorne, Chief Legal Counsel for Apex," he introduced himself. "Mrs. Adams, you committed identity theft by forging your husband and his signature to unlawfully access his retirement accounts. You then utilized a corporate credit line to secure a $25,000 deposit for a private event. When you realized you could not cover the subsequent payments, you initiated a fraudulent chargeback, claiming vendor deception. Marcus tapped the red folder. That constitutes wire fraud, bank fraud, and breach of contract. Apex Hospitality Group has a fiduciary duty to report these infractions to the federal authorities. We submitted the IP addresses, the forged digital signatures, and the audio recordings of you confirming the transaction. Kendrick turned slowly to look at his wife. The sheer magnitude of her stupidity was finally laid bare in front of top-tier corporate lawyers. She had not just maxed out a credit card. She had orchestrated a multi-tiered financial crime against a corporate giant. "You recorded her?" Diane gasped, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. "You tapped your own sister and her phone. All calls to our booking agents are recorded for quality and security purposes." Mother Audrey replied, her tone perfectly even. "It is a standard corporate policy." Melanie gladly verified her identity and the fraudulent funds on a recorded and time-stamped line. William slammed his hand on the table again, but the gesture lacked its former power. It looked desperate. "I will cover the $25,000, he demanded, pulling his checkbook from his breast pocket. "I will write the check right now. You take the money, you unfreeze Kendrick and his accounts, and we walk away. You are not putting your sister in jail." "Put your checkbook away," William Audrey said. "This is not a family dinner where you can just throw money at a problem to make it disappear." The federal banking matrix automatically locked Kendrick and his assets the moment the fraud was verified. "I do not have the power to unfreeze them." His wealth management firm suspended him because his credentials are now flagged for federal investigation. "Your golden child destroyed your legacy." Audrey did not blink as the crushing weight of her words settled over the sprawling boardroom. She slowly opened the heavy red folder, the crisp sound of turning paper cutting through the suffocating silence. William stood completely rigid, his hand still hovering awkwardly near his breast pocket, where his checkbook lay entirely useless. Melanie trembled, her manicured fingers twisting the fabric of her designer blouse, her eyes darting toward the mahogany exit doors, as if calculating the exact distance for a desperate escape. Kendrick remained frozen against the glass wall, his analytical mind desperately trying to comprehend the sheer scale of the financial nightmare his wife had dragged him into. Audrey smoothed her hand over the top document, a highly detailed financial ledger bearing the official corporate seals of both Apex Hospitality Group and their partnered federal banking institution. She looked directly at her sister, her expression devoid of any familial warmth. "You thought you could just bully your way through life without consequences." Melanie Audrey began, her voice echoing off the floor to ceiling windows. "You assumed that because Dad always bailed you out of your minor inconveniences, a multinational hospitality conglomerate would simply look the other way when you decided to play accounting games. You assumed wrong. Apex Hospitality does not operate on temper tantrums. We operate on legally binding contracts and immutable financial trails." Audrey pulled a high-resolution printout from the stack and slid it across the polished glass table. It stopped precisely in front of Kendrick. He stared down at the paper, his breathing turning ragged. It was a digital log of the transaction history, complete with IP addresses, timestamps, and authorization codes. "Let us review your brilliant financial strategy." Audrey continued, her gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of her family. "Melanie, you did not just borrow against Kendrick's retirement account to pay the initial venue fee. That was only the beginning of your breathtakingly arrogant scheme. The Grand Astoria requires a $50,000 total commitment for the grand ballroom package you absolutely insisted upon having. You only managed to secure $25,000 from your husband's hard-earned 401k. You needed another $25,000 to pay the remaining balance to the catering and event staff." William scoffed, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "So she was short on cash." "That is a simple breach of contract, Audrey. You do not need to drag federal banking authorities into a simple venue dispute. I can write a check to cover the remaining balance right now, and we can walk away from this absurd theatrical performance." Audrey did not even look at her father. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on Melanie, whose face had completely drained of color. She looked like a ghost standing in the center of the luxurious penthouse. If it were a simple breach of contract, Dad, we would have just kept the deposit and sent her a polite cancellation notice, Audrey stated coldly. But Melanie did not just miss a payment. She decided to get creative. Melanie, you did not just borrow against Kendrick's retirement. You used Diane's social security number to open a shadow credit line to pay the remaining balance, then reported the card as stolen when you realized you could not make the first payment. The boardroom descended into a state of absolute paralyzing shock. The sheer audacity of the crime hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Diane gasped, taking a sudden stumbling step away from her own daughter. She clutched her chest, her aristocratic composure completely shattering. "You stole my identity!" Diane shrieked, her voice echoing wildly across the glass walls. "You used my social security number. How could you possibly do something so incredibly vile to your own mother?" Melanie shrank back, bursting into loud, hysterical sobs. She cowered under the intense, accusing glares of everyone in the room. "I had to do it, Mom," she wailed, tears ruining her perfectly applied makeup. "I did not have a choice. The party planner said they were going to release the date to another family if I did not put down the rest of the money immediately. I only did it because Audrey was being selfish. If she had just given me the cash when I asked her yesterday, I would have paid off the shadow account, and nobody would have ever known. This is Audrey's fault for not helping her family." The sheer delusion of Melanie's defense was staggering. She was standing in a corporate boardroom facing federal fraud charges and still attempting to cast herself as the victim of her sister's lack of generosity. Kendrick turned on Melanie with pure venom in his eyes. His career was over. His assets were frozen, and his reputation in the financial sector was permanently destroyed because of her psychotic need to show off for a group of suburban teenagers. "You absolute parasite!" Kendrick roared, stepping toward her with clenched fists. "I am going to divorce you. I am going to make sure you spend the next decade rotting in a federal prison cell. You have ruined my entire life over a sweet 16 party. You are a criminal." William stepped between Kendrick and Melanie, raising his hands in a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that had completely spiraled out of his grasp. "Kendrick, calm down immediately. We can fix this. We just need to get our lawyers on the phone and figure out a strategy to handle the credit card company." Audrey watched the chaotic scene unfold with absolute detachment. She had spent her life shrinking herself to make them feel important. She was done shrinking. She grabbed a much thicker folder from the stack. The heavy thud of the cardboard hitting the glass instantly silenced the shouting match happening at the end of the room. "Kendrick is right about the divorce," Audrey said softly, but she was not done. She slid a second folder toward William. Kendrick glared at his wife with absolute disgust, ignoring her pathetic attempts to justify stealing her mother's identity. But William was not finished. He refused to accept that the daughter he had spent a lifetime belittling was holding the reins of his family's destruction. He stepped away from the table, straightening his expensive suit jacket, attempting to summon the towering patriarchal authority that had ruled their household for decades. "You think because you run some company you can disrespect us?" William bellowed, his voice vibrating with desperate fury. "You sit in that chair and pass judgment on your sister as if you are some untouchable titan. You forget who puts a roof over your head. I still own the building you live in. You're evicted. Pack your bags by tonight." Audrey leaned back in her high-backed leather chair. She looked at her father for a long, silent moment. Then a sharp, piercing laugh escaped her lips. It was a cold sound, completely devoid of humor, echoing off the pristine glass walls of the boardroom. William slammed his fist against Kendrick's chair. "You find it funny that you are going to be sleeping on the street," he shouted. Audrey stopped laughing. She rested her elbows on the armrests, steepling her fingers. "I find it hilarious that you still believe you possess any leverage over me," she said smoothly. "You haven't owned that building for 6 months, William. You defaulted on the commercial loan. A holding company bought it at auction." Diane snapped her head toward her husband, her eyes wide with fresh panic. "William, what is she talking about? We own that building. It generates our primary rental income." "Do not listen to her, Diane," William barked, though a sudden bead of sweat materialized on his forehead. She is lying. She is trying to confuse us with corporate jargon. Audrey tapped the second thick folder she had pushed across the glass table earlier. Open it, Dad, she challenged. Or do you want Marcus to read it aloud for the room? William stared at the folder as if it contained a live explosive. He did not move. Marcus Thorne, the chief legal counsel, gladly picked up the document. He adjusted his glasses with terrifying precision. According to federal property records, Marcus stated, his voice clinical and devastating, William Adams defaulted on the commercial balloon loan tied to the Elm Street residential complex exactly 8 months ago. After a 90-day grace period expired with 0 payments made, the bank seized the asset. The property was sold at a private commercial auction 6 months ago to a holding company. Diane grabbed William by the arm, her acrylic nails digging into his suit sleeve. You told me we refinanced, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You told me the bank lowered our rate. William, tell me she is lying. William could not speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The pristine facade of his financial dominance was shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of his favored daughter and his horrified wife. Audrey leaned forward, locking eyes with the man who had constantly told her she would never amount to anything. I am the holding company. I bought it. I am your landlord. Melanie gasped, taking another step back, completely forgetting her own impending federal charges, as the sheer scale of Audrey's power became undeniably real. You let me believe I was providing for you. William rasped, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. You paid me rent every month. I paid rent to my own company to maintain the illusion, Audrey corrected coldly. I let you continue acting as the property manager because I wanted to see exactly how deep your financial rot went. You needed the management fee to maintain your country club memberships and buy Diane's designer bags. You paraded around town acting like a real estate mogul, completely oblivious to the fact that you were nothing more than my employee. William staggered backward. His knees hit the edge of a leather guest chair, and he slumped down into it, the air rushing from his lungs. The absolute humiliation of the truth was suffocating him. He had spent his entire life demanding obedience, using his wealth as a weapon to control his family. And now he was sitting in his daughter's penthouse boardroom, realizing he was entirely at her mercy. But we are not just here to discuss your foreclosure, Audrey said, her tone devoid of any sympathy. We are here to discuss your termination. Diane whipped her head back toward Audrey. Termination? You cannot fire your own father. I can, and I did, Audrey replied, gesturing to Marcus. The lawyer flipped to the next page in the file. During the past 6 months of your tenure as property manager, an external audit was conducted on the building's maintenance accounts, Marcus explained. We found massive discrepancies between the repair invoices you submitted and the actual work performed on the premises. Audrey stood up slowly. She walked around the massive mahogany table, her designer heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. She stopped directly in front of her father. And as of this morning, I fired you as the property manager for embezzling maintenance funds, Audrey stated, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You billed us for $80,000 in roof repairs that never happened. You funneled those funds directly into your personal checking account to cover the gambling debts you accrued trying to win back the money you lost on the building. Your access to the building's operational funds has been permanently severed. William clutched his chest. His hand gripped the fabric of his shirt as a sharp, agonizing pain radiated through his ribs. His breathing became incredibly shallow. His primary source of income and his ultimate leverage over Audrey was just an illusion she allowed him to believe. He stared at her, wheezing, realizing that he was completely, utterly, irrevocably ruined and defeated by his own daughter, whose power now felt absolutely permanent and impossibly massive here today. Diane watched her husband slump into the leather chair, his face a terrifying shade of gray. The man who had commanded every room he entered, who had dictated the lives of his daughters with an iron fist, was now gasping for breath like a stranded fish. Ignoring his distress, Diane's instincts flared. She straightened her posture, lifting her chin to look down her nose at the daughter she had spent a lifetime dismissing. If their financial dominance was a lie, she would fall back on the one thing she believed Audrey could never touch: her social superiority. You think this little corporate performance changes anything? Diane sneered, her voice dripping with aristocratic contempt. Money does not just buy class, Audrey. It certainly does not buy pedigree. We are legacy members of the Oakbrook Country Club. We serve on the charity boards. We have standing in this community that took decades to cultivate. People respect us. They admire us. You can sit in your glass tower surrounded by lawyers, but out there in the real world, you are nothing. You have no husband. You have no children. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to buy the respect you could never earn naturally. Audrey did not flinch at the venomous words. She simply looked at her mother with a mixture of pity and profound exhaustion. Diane had always used high society snobbery as a weapon, wielding country club memberships and gala invitations to make everyone else feel inadequate. It was the exact same tactic Melanie used, learned directly from the matriarch herself. Audrey reached across the polished glass table and picked up a sleek silver iPad. She tapped the screen twice. A massive digital display descended from the ceiling behind her, casting a bright glow across the darkened boardroom. "Let us talk about Oakbrook, Mom," Audrey said, her voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. She swiped her finger across the tablet. The screen illuminated with a highly detailed financial ledger complete with the Oakbrook Country Club crest at the top. The numbers highlighted in neon red were glaringly obvious. You love to boast about your legacy status. You love to remind everyone that the Addams family practically founded the club. But you conveniently forgot to ever mention the harsh reality of your membership. Diane swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the glowing screen. The aristocratic mask was beginning to slip, revealing the truly terrified woman beneath. "You two are exactly $120,000 behind on your membership dues and homeowner association fees," Audrey announced, her words hitting the room like physical strikes. "You have not paid a single invoice in over 2 years. You have been dining on credit, golfing on credit, and hosting your pathetic little charity luncheons on credit." The club board was preparing to publicly revoke your membership next week. They had already drafted the paperwork to place a lien on your house to recover all of the delinquent funds. "That is private club business," Diane shrieked, taking a step toward the screen, as if she could physically tear the digital projection down. "You hacked into their servers. I will personally have you arrested for cybercrimes." "I did not hack anything," Audrey replied smoothly. She tapped the iPad again, bringing up a new document bearing the Apex Hospitality Group logo alongside the Oakbrook crest. Apex Hospitality recently expanded its luxury leisure division. 3 days ago, my acquisitions team purchased the entire debt portfolio of the Oakbrook Country Club. They were hemorrhaging money because entitled members like you repeatedly refused to pay all their bills. We bailed them out. Audrey leaned forward, resting her hands on the glass table. Her gaze pinned Diane to the floor. "I am now your primary creditor. You do not owe the club anymore, Mom. You owe me. And my patience is significantly shorter than the old country club board of directors. If that $120,000 is not paid in full in exactly 48 hours, I will personally initiate the foreclosure on your suburban mansion. You will lose the house, the memberships, and every single ounce of that standing you just bragged about." Diane let out a choked sob, pressing her hands over her mouth. The reality of her impending social and financial annihilation crashed down on her. Melanie stood frozen in the corner, her own legal nightmare completely eclipsed by the utter destruction of her parents. The entire Addams family empire was nothing but a hollow shell of debt, fraud, and lies. Kendrick watched the entire exchange with cold, calculating eyes. His finance background allowed him to process the absolute devastation playing out in the boardroom faster than anyone else. His father-in-law was an embezzler facing immediate eviction and financial ruin. His mother-in-law was about to be publicly foreclosed upon and stripped of her social standing. His wife had committed federal wire fraud and identity theft, dragging his own pristine career into the mud. The entire Addams family was a sinking ship, rapidly taking on water, and Kendrick had absolutely no intention of drowning with them. He straightened his tie, his posture shifting from panicked victim to ruthless opportunist. He looked at Melanie, the woman he had married for her perceived wealth and status, and felt nothing but absolute contempt. Kendrick stepped away from the corner, moving very purposefully toward the center of the boardroom. He ignored Melanie completely and looked directly at Audrey, the only person in the room who held any actual power. Melanie gasped, staggering backward as if she was physically struck. Her own husband was offering her to the wolves to save his career. Kendrick slammed his palms flat against the thick glass of the boardroom table. The loud crack finally silenced Diane's hysterical sobbing. He turned his body away from the digital projection of his in-laws' crippling country club debt and locked his eyes onto his wife. The look of pure, unadulterated disgust radiating from his face made Melanie shrink back further into the corner of the room. "You bankrupt my retirement," Kendrick snarled, his voice vibrating with a lethal edge. "You single-handedly destroy my immaculate credit score. You drag my professional name into a federal wire fraud investigation initiated by a massive multinational conglomerate. And for what? So you could throw a lavish Sweet 16 party to impress a bunch of broke frauds posing as elites." He gestured wildly toward William and Diane, who were still reeling from the revelation of their own impending foreclosure. "Look at them, Melanie. Look at the legacy you were so desperate to protect. Your parents do not even own the designer country club sweaters on their backs. They are completely destitute. I married into a family of absolute financial parasites." Melanie let out a choked, desperate wail. She lunged forward, her hands grasping frantically at the sleeves of Kendrick's tailored suit. "Kendrick, please," she begged, tears carving dark tracks through her expensive foundation. "You cannot say these things in front of her. We are a team. We can fight this together. My father will find a way to fix the debt. We just need to hire our own lawyers and block her access to the accounts." Kendrick shoved her off with such intense physical force that she stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping on the polished marble floor. He did not spare her a second glance as she caught herself against the wall, gasping for air. His survival instinct, honed by years in the cutthroat financial sector, had completely taken over. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he had absolutely no intention of going down with the Addams family. He turned his attention back to the head of the table. The arrogant, condescending brother-in-law, who had walked into the lobby 30 minutes ago, was completely gone. In his place stood a desperate man trying to salvage the burning wreckage of his professional life. "Ms. Addams," Kendrick said, addressing Audrey formally for the first time in his entire life. He straightened his posture, speaking directly to her and Marcus Thorne, as if negotiating a high-stakes corporate plea deal. "I had absolutely no prior knowledge of my wife's wire fraud. I did not authorize the use of my retirement funds, nor was I aware she had created a shadow credit line using your mother's identity. I have audio recordings on my home security network that explicitly capture her admitting to orchestrating this entire scheme while I was at work." He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward with intense urgency. "I will hand those digital drives over to your legal department right now. I will testify to that fact in any capacity your legal team requires. I will sign whatever affidavits you need to ensure Apex Hospitality Group can prosecute her to the fullest extent of the law. I just need you to unfreeze my core operating accounts and grant me full immunity from your civil litigation." Melanie let out a piercing, guttural scream. The reality of her husband trading her freedom for his own financial survival shattered whatever remained of her sanity. "You coward!" Melanie shrieked, lunging at him again, her hands curling into claws. "You are abandoning your own wife to save your pathetic job. You sat in our house and drank my parents' wine and let them pay for our wedding, and now you want to throw me in a federal prison?" William, his face still a dangerous shade of purple from his own eviction and embezzlement reveal, turned his fury onto his son-in-law. "You spineless rat!" William bellowed, stepping aggressively toward Kendrick. "You took a vow to protect my daughter. You stand here and turn on your own family the second things get difficult. You are less of a man than I ever realized. I will make sure every wealth management firm in this city knows you are a traitor who turns on his own blood." Kendrick laughed bitterly. "You do not have a pot to pitch in, William." Kendrick fired back, his voice echoing over William's shouting. "You are an unemployed, embezzling fraud who is about to be foreclosed on by your own daughter. You have zero influence in my industry. Your entire life is a mirage." Diane began weeping uncontrollably, sinking into one of the leather chairs. "The country club is going to publish our debt," she wailed, pulling at her hair. "My friends are going to see the foreclosure notices. We are going to be ruined. We will have to leave the state." The luxurious boardroom rapidly devolved into a chaotic, vicious screaming match among the villains. Melanie was sobbing and hurling insults at Kendrick, accusing him of ruining her life. Kendrick shouted back, listing every dollar she had ever wasted. William was screaming at Kendrick, his chest heaving, as he tried to defend his non-existent honor. Diane simply cried, mourning the death of her social supremacy. They were tearing each other apart, stripping away decades of fake smiles and passive-aggressive superiority to reveal the ugly, selfish core of their family dynamic. Audrey sat back in her high-backed leather executive chair. She reached for the porcelain cup resting near her red folders and took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. The blend was perfect. She did not raise her voice to interrupt them. She did not attempt to calm the situation or offer any familial comfort. She simply watched the spectacular implosion play out exactly as she had meticulously planned. The dominoes had fallen flawlessly. Audrey set her cup down, pressed the silver button on her intercom console, and called security to escort them out. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open immediately following Audrey's sharp command. 4 massive security guards in immaculate dark suits marched into the room with absolute military precision. They did not speak a single word. 2 of the men grabbed William by his biceps, hoisting him out of the leather chair and completely ignoring his sputtering outrage. Diane shrieked loudly, clutching her expensive designer handbag to her chest as another guard firmly directed her toward the glass exit doors. Melanie was practically dragged away, her sharp heels scraping terribly across the pristine marble floor, still sobbing uncontrollably about her ruined life. Kendrick, meanwhile, adjusted his tie one last time and briskly walked out entirely on his own accord, eager to distance himself from the toxic wreckage of his marriage. The guards marched the screaming family down the long corridor and herded them into the high-speed service elevator. The rapid descent to the ground floor happened in complete, suffocating silence. Once they reached the lobby, the guards pushed them directly through the revolving glass doors. The family was unceremoniously dumped onto the bustling downtown sidewalk in broad daylight. Dozens of pedestrians stopped to stare at the bizarre spectacle. The supposedly elite Addams family now looked like a group of disheveled lunatics shouting on the public pavement. Kendrick immediately flagged down a passing yellow cab. He jumped into the back seat, locked the door, and sped off into the city traffic without offering a single backward glance at his hysterical wife. William and Diane ignored Melanie entirely. They practically sprinted toward the parking garage where they had left their leased luxury sedan. The ride back to their upscale suburban neighborhood was a frantic, hyperventilating blur of pure panic. William kept his knuckles white on the leather steering wheel, his jaw locked in a rigid expression of absolute terror. Diane sat in the passenger seat, aggressively chewing on her thumbnail, murmuring frantically about the country club, the massive debt, and the terrifying 48-hour deadline Audrey had mandated. They turned onto their exclusive street and pulled into the sprawling circular driveway of their Oakbrook mansion. The manicured lawns, the towering white pillars, and the 3-car garage suddenly looked less like a symbol of wealth and more like a giant, inescapable trap. They rushed inside the huge house, the heavy front door slamming shut behind them. William immediately sprinted down the hallway toward his private study. He bypassed his desk and went straight to the hidden wall safe, pulling out a heavy canvas duffel bag. Diane ran up the grand sweeping staircase to the master suite, throwing open the doors to her massive walk-in closet. The frantic packing process began instantly. William grabbed stacks of emergency cash, expensive vintage watches, and thick folders containing untraceable bearer bonds. Diane pulled velvet boxes from her jewelry drawers, tossing diamond necklaces, pearl earrings, and heavy gold bracelets into a leather tote bag. They were operating purely on panic-driven survival instincts. They had to hide their most liquid assets immediately before Audrey or the bank initiated the foreclosure protocols and froze everything they possessed. They tore through their own home like desperate burglars, pulling artwork from the walls and stuffing anything remotely valuable into their overstuffed bags. Their prestigious legacy meant absolutely nothing now. 30 minutes later, a beat-up economy rideshare vehicle pulled up to the wrought iron security gate. Melanie stumbled out of the back seat, her expensive makeup completely ruined, dark mascara streaks tracking down her pale cheeks. She ran up the long driveway, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and pounded her fists against the solid mahogany front door. Finding it unlocked, she pushed her way inside, her frantic voice echoing wildly in the grand foyer. She ran through the main floor and found her parents in the study, aggressively shoving silver heirlooms into a large suitcase. Melanie dropped to her knees right in the middle of the expensive Persian rug, begging them for immediate financial assistance. She explained through heavy, choking sobs that Kendrick had canceled all her premium credit cards while she was sitting in the rideshare car. He had electronically locked her out of their shared checking accounts and completely drained their joint savings. He took the Mercedes, leaving her entirely stranded. She had zero access to cash. She needed her parents to hire a top-tier criminal defense attorney to fight the federal wire fraud charges Audrey was pushing. She needed William to write a massive check to make this entire nightmare go away, just like he always did. Melanie clung desperately to the hem of her mother's designer skirt. She wailed loudly about how incredibly unfair the universe was being to her. She cried about how she only stole the identity and the money because she wanted to give her daughter the perfect sweet 16 party. She insisted that Audrey was the real villain for being so selfish and ruining their beautiful family dynamic. Melanie looked up at Diane, fully expecting her mother to wrap her in a warm, protective embrace. She expected Diane to coddle her, to stroke her hair, and to promise that Daddy would definitely fix everything by tomorrow morning. Instead, Diane froze completely still. She looked down at the golden child she had fiercely protected and spoiled rotten for 3 decades. Diane looked at the heavy diamond tennis bracelet she was currently trying to shove into a velvet pouch to magically save herself from living on the street. The intense, terrifying realization of their suddenly shared poverty finally snapped something incredibly deep inside Diane's fractured brain. "We have absolutely nothing left because of your sheer arrogant stupidity," Diane hissed, her voice shaking with an unprecedented level of pure, unadulterated hatred. Diane dropped the velvet pouch onto the mahogany desk. She turned around to face her loudly weeping daughter. Her right arm swung back with shocking speed and raw power. Diane delivered a resounding, vicious slap directly across Melanie's face. The sharp, violent crack of Diane's palm striking Melanie's cheek echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous mahogany foyer. The physical force of the blow snapped Melanie's head to the side, sending her stumbling backward until her shoulders hit the grand staircase banister. A heavy, stunned silence descended over the room, broken only by the sound of Diane's rapid, ragged breathing. Her hand hovered in the air, trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and absolute fury. "Because of your stupid, frivolous party, we are losing our house," Diane screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. The polished, aristocratic mother who had spent her entire life shielding her golden child from any semblance of consequence was entirely gone. "You forged my signature. You opened fraudulent accounts using my social security number. You dragged federal investigators to our doorstep. Give me back the money you stole right now." Melanie clutched her stinging, bright red cheek, staring at her mother in total disbelief. Fresh tears spilled over her ruined mascara. "Mom, please," Melanie wailed, sliding down the base of the banister until she hit the marble floor. "I do not have a dime. I spent everything on the catering deposit and the custom invitations. Kendrick froze the rest of my accounts. I am completely broke." The pristine facade of the golden child shattered completely into dust. For 30 years, Melanie had been paraded around as the pinnacle of Adam's family success, the perfect daughter with the perfect marriage and the perfect life. Now she was just a weeping, destitute fraud facing federal prison, begging for scraps from parents who were equally bankrupt. Diane looked down at her daughter with overwhelming revulsion. She turned her back on Melanie and aggressively resumed shoving her silver candlesticks into her leather tote bag. Across the foyer, William completely ignored his daughter's hysterical breakdown. He was pacing furiously near the study doors, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was frantically scrolling through his contacts, calling the wealthy men he had golfed with, dined with, and considered his elite peers for decades. He needed a massive immediate loan to cover the country club debt before Audrey executed the foreclosure. He dialed Arthur Sterling, the president of the local commerce board. "Arthur, my friend," William said, forcing a hearty, booming laugh that sounded incredibly hollow. "I find myself in a minor liquidity bind this afternoon. A temporary cash flow issue with some real estate assets. I need a quick loan of $200,000. I can pay you back with interest by next week." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The line clicked. William stared at the phone. Arthur had hung up without uttering a single word. William dialed again, his hands shaking. He called Richard Vance, a hedge fund manager, and his frequent doubles partner at Oakbrook. Richard answered on the third ring. "Richard, listen." William stammered, abandoning the casual facade. "I am in an emergency situation. My accounts are temporarily frozen, and I need capital immediately." "William, do not ever call this number again," Richard replied, his voice dripping with icy contempt. "Word travels fast in this town. We all know what happened at the Apex building this morning. We know Audrey bought your debt. We know you were fired for embezzling maintenance funds. You are a toxic asset, William. You are finished here." The line went dead. William dropped the phone. It clattered against the marble floor. He looked at his wife and his weeping daughter. The elite social network he had spent his entire life cultivating had completely abandoned him in less than an hour. The Addams family name was officially poison. They had no allies, no leverage, and no money. A sharp, heavy knock at the front door made all three of them jump. Diane froze, dropping a silver serving spoon. William stared at the heavy wooden panels, paralyzing fear gripping his chest. Melanie simply tucked her knees to her chest and sobbed louder. William slowly walked toward the entryway and pulled open the heavy door. A man in a plain beige jacket stood on the front porch, holding a thick stack of legal documents attached to a clipboard. He looked bored, entirely unaffected by the palpable panic radiating from the house. "William and Diane Addams?" The man asked, his tone strictly professional. "Yes," William rasped, his throat bone dry. "You have been served," the man said. He shoved the heavy stack of papers into William's trembling hands, turned around and walked back to his nondescript sedan parked at the curb. William stared down at the documents. The bold black lettering at the top of the page sealed their fate. It was the official notice of foreclosure legally initiated by the legal department of Apex Hospitality Group. The document explicitly stated that the Oakbrook debt portfolio had been called in. The 48-hour countdown had officially begun. The clock was ticking, and they had absolutely no way to stop it. Diane snatched the papers from William's hands, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. A terrifying wail escaped her throat. She dropped the papers, letting them scatter across the foyer floor like discarded trash. She sank against the wall, clutching her chest, realizing that the suburban mansion she prized above all else would be seized and auctioned off to the highest bidder by the end of the week. A sleek black car suddenly pulled into the driveway, tires crunching loudly against the pristine gravel. Melanie looked up from the floor, a tiny spark of desperate hope igniting in her chest. Kendrick stepped out of the driver's side door. He buttoned his suit jacket, his face a mask of absolute, unfeeling stone. He walked up the front steps and stepped directly over the scattered foreclosure documents. He did not look at William or Diane. He did not rush to comfort his weeping wife. He simply stood in the center of the foyer, holding a thick manila legal envelope. The heavy manila envelope slipped from Kendrick's meticulously manicured fingers. It landed on the polished marble floor directly in front of Melanie's knees, with a dull, hollow, and heavy thud. The sound was not particularly loud, yet it echoed through the grand foyer with the finality of a judge striking a gavel. Melanie stared blankly at the thick package. Her cheek was still burning a vivid crimson from Diane's brutal slap, but the physical pain instantly vanished, replaced by an icy, suffocating dread. She slowly shifted her gaze upward, looking into the eyes of the man she had married years ago. There was absolutely no trace of the loving husband who had vowed to protect her. The man standing above her was a ruthless corporate shark examining a bankrupt asset. Inside that envelope are the expedited divorce proceedings. Kendrick stated, his voice devoid of any human warmth or emotional inflection. I have already signed my portion. My legal team filed the preliminary injunctions electronically while I was in the cab. You will also find the custody arrangement documents. I am filing for immediate, permanent, and sole physical and legal custody of Brianna. Melanie let out a ragged, guttural, desperate gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth as the devastating reality of his words crashed over her. You cannot take my daughter, she choked out, her voice breaking under the extreme weight of her panic. You cannot do this to me, Kendrick. We are a family. We have a life together. We had a life together, Kendrick corrected, his tone razor sharp. That life ended the exact second you decided to commit federal wire fraud and drag my professional reputation into your pathetic, desperate attempt to impress a bunch of vapid country club wives. You completely jeopardized my entire corporate career. You jeopardized my licenses. I am completely insulating myself and my daughter from the impending legal fallout of your spectacular stupidity. I have cited your extreme financial instability and your impending criminal indictment as the primary grounds for emergency sole custody. No judge in this state will deny my petition. Melanie scrambled forward on her hands and knees. She threw her arms around Kendrick's impeccably tailored legs, burying her tear-stained face into the expensive wool fabric of his trousers. She was completely unraveled, a chaotic mess of ruined makeup and desperate pleading sobs. Please, Kendrick, I am begging you, she wailed endlessly. Her fingers gripped his pant legs so tightly her knuckles turned white. I will fix this. I will sell my jewelry. I will find a way to pay Audrey back. You cannot leave me here. They are taking the house. My mother just hit me. You are my husband. You have to protect me. I love you. Kendrick did not flinch. He did not reach down to comfort her. He did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. He simply looked down at her with a chilling clinical detachment. He possessed a survival instinct that had kept him secure. That instinct was screaming at him to sever the rotting limb before the infection spread. You ruined my immaculate credit score, Melanie, Kendrick said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. He placed his hands firmly on her shoulders and shoved her away with enough force to break her grip. She slumped backward onto the cold marble, gasping for air, as if he had stolen the oxygen from her lungs. In my world, credit is everything. It is trust. It is leverage. It is survival. You single-handedly destroyed it. You lied to me. You stole from everyone. You stole from your own mother. You put our child in the crosshairs of a massive corporate scandal. In my world, that is completely unforgivable. I will not let you drag me down to the bottom of the ocean to drown with you and your parasitic parents. Kendrick adjusted his jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles where her desperate hands had clutched him. He gave her one final disgusted look. My lawyers will contact you, he said. Do not attempt to call my phone. I have already blocked your number. Do not come to my office under any circumstances whatsoever. Security has been instructed to escort you off the premises immediately if you show up. You are entirely on your own. Kendrick turned on his heel and walked out the front door. The heavy mahogany slammed shut behind him, sealing Melanie inside the imploding mansion. She collapsed entirely against the floor, her body racked with violent, uncontrollable sobbing. She was completely broken, stripped of her husband, her daughter, her social standing, and her dignity. From the hallway, William and Diane emerged. They were both dragging massive overstuffed designer suitcases behind them, entirely focused on their own immediate desperate escape plan. William had a rolled-up canvas under his arm, a priceless original oil painting he had just sliced out of its antique frame in the study. Diane had layered 3 heavy diamond necklaces over her silk blouse, her pockets bulging with stolen cash and bonds. They were practically vibrating with frantic, self-serving energy. Melanie looked up at them, reaching out a trembling hand. Mom, Dad, help me, she sobbed, her voice a pathetic whimper. He took Brianna. He left me. William did not even pause. He stepped right over his weeping daughter's outstretched hand, without pausing at all today. He dragged his heavy suitcase over the scattered foreclosure documents without a second glance. Diane followed right behind him, her face a mask of cold, terrified determination. She literally stepped over Melanie's legs. Neither parent offered a word of comfort. The golden child was a liability. They hurried out the side door toward the garage, abandoning her. High above the chaotic foyer, hidden in the shadows of the second-floor balcony, 15-year-old Brianna had been listening to everything. She pulled out her smartphone, dialed a number she had not called in years, and patiently waited for an answer. Audrey sat behind her massive glass desk in her penthouse office at Apex Hospitality Group. The sprawling skyline of Chicago stretched out behind her, a glittering grid of power and commerce that she now commanded. Spread neatly across the polished glass surface were the final foreclosure documents for the Oakbrook estate. The Adams family was officially destitute. Audrey picked up a sleek silver pen, running her thumb over the smooth metal as she carefully reviewed the asset seizure timeline. She had meticulously orchestrated this exact outcome for years, dismantling their fake empire brick by brick. Every legal trap had sprung perfectly. The total financial ruin of her abusers was practically complete. Suddenly, the sharp ringing of her private cell phone broke the absolute silence of the room. Only 3 people in the entire world possessed this specific number. Audrey checked the caller ID and raised a single sculpted eyebrow. The name glowing on the screen belonged to a teenager she had not spoken to in years. Audrey set the silver pen down, picked up the phone, and swiped to answer. She did not offer a warm greeting. "Speak," Audrey commanded, her voice strictly professional. On the other end of the secure line, 15-year-old Brianna choked back a heavy sob. "Aunt Audrey, please do not hang up." Audrey leaned back in her high-backed leather chair, listening to the chaotic background noise filtering through the phone speaker. She could hear the distinct sound of shattering glass and William roaring obscenities. Melanie was wailing uncontrollably in the distance, her voice raw. "My mom is screaming on the floor," Brianna cried, her voice shaking with panic. "Grandpa is breaking things in the study. They are throwing everything into bags. Mom said Kendrick left us and took all the money. They say we are going to be homeless." Audrey remained entirely silent, letting the teenager unravel the disaster she had already engineered. "It is everywhere," Brianna sobbed, her breath hitching. "My friends are mocking me online because the Sweet 16 is canceled. The country club group chat is laughing at us. Everyone knows about the fraud. They are calling my mom a thief. Aunt Audrey, I am so scared. I do not know what to do." "Why are you calling me Brianna?" Audrey asked evenly. "Your mother spent your entire life teaching you that I was a worthless, pathetic loser. You laughed right along with her when I was struggling." "I know," Brianna gasped out, her tears flowing now. "I am sorry. I was just doing what they told me to do. But I am looking at them right now. They are acting like animals. They left my mom on the floor and are just trying to save their jewelry. I do not want to be like them. I do not want to end up like my mother. Please, you have to help me." Audrey stood up from her desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny cars navigating the streets below. She listened to the genuine terror vibrating in her niece's voice. Audrey knew exactly who Brianna was. The girl was a product of her toxic environment, a spoiled miniature version of Melanie. For 15 years, Brianna had been draped in clothes, handed premium credit cards, and taught that empathy was a weakness for poor people. She had watched her parents treat service workers like garbage and learned to mimic their casual cruelty. However, Audrey also possessed a ruthless sense of logic. Brianna was still just a child. She was a minor who had never asked to be born into a family of narcissistic parasites. The girl had been programmed by William and Diane, just as Melanie had been programmed decades ago. The cycle of generational trauma and financial abuse was playing out right in front of her. Audrey held the ultimate power in this situation. She could easily hang up the phone right now, let the police arrest Melanie for wire fraud, and allow Child Protective Services to absorb Brianna into the state foster system. She could let the girl sink with the burning ship, a punishment for the Adams family legacy. But hearing Brianna explicitly reject her mother's path sparked a shred of intrigue within Audrey's mind. The teenager was terrified of becoming Melanie. That fear was a powerful tool. It meant the young girl could still be reprogrammed. If Audrey intervened today, she could sever the toxic Adams bloodline once and for all. She could take the golden grandchild and reshape her into something useful, something disciplined, and something real. It was the ultimate victory over Diane and William, stealing their prized legacy and forcing the girl to work for a living. Audrey turned away from the window and walked slowly back to her desk. She tapped her polished fingernails against the foreclosure documents. "Listen to me, Brianna," Audrey said, her voice dropping to a low register. "I am going to send a black car to the end of your street. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack a single bag. You will leave the designer clothes, the jewelry, and the expensive shoes behind. You will bring only the absolute essentials. If you are not sitting in that car when the timer runs out, I will instruct the driver to leave, and you will face the police with your mother." "I understand," Brianna cried softly. "I will be there." "Do not interrupt me," Audrey snapped, silencing the girl. "I am offering you a lifeline out of that burning house, but if I save you, everything changes. There are no more country clubs. There are no more trust funds. There is no more golden child treatment. You are entering my world now, and my world requires discipline, hard work, and loyalty." Audrey picked up the silver pen, pointing it at the thick glass as if Brianna were sitting in front of her. "Pack a bag, Brianna, but if I save you, you play by my rules tonight." 2 brutal days evaporated. 48 agonizing hours of slammed doors, unanswered voicemails, and plummeting social capital. William had driven to the Oak Brook Country Club, intending to corner Arthur Sterling in the men's grill and demand a bridge loan face-to-face. Instead, when William swiped his platinum membership card at the gilded wrought iron front gates, the scanner flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. A junior security guard, a young man William had routinely undertipped and verbally abused for 5 years, stepped out of the booth and explicitly informed him that the Adams family was permanently banned from the premises. William had shouted, threatened to sue, and demanded the board of directors. The guard simply tapped his radio, and William was forced to reverse his luxury sedan into the busy street to avoid a trespassing charge. Things at home were significantly worse. Diane had spent hours screaming at customer service representatives from 3 different financial institutions. The bank had frozen their home equity line of credit, citing the active foreclosure proceedings initiated by Apex Hospitality Group. The sprawling suburban mansion was no longer a financial lifeline. It was a tomb. The final crushing blow arrived on the second afternoon. A pair of solemn plainclothes detectives knocked on the mahogany front door. They did not have foreclosure papers. They handed Melanie a formal notification of an active criminal investigation for identity theft and federal wire fraud. The documents detailed the exact amounts drained from Diane's shadow accounts to fund the extravagant Sweet 16 party. Melanie had collapsed onto the foyer floor, gasping for air, staring at the official police letterhead that practically guaranteed her future incarceration. Now the 3 of them sat in the cavernous living room. The chandelier remained unlit. Diane obsessively unplugged every lamp and appliance to save electricity, wrapping herself in a cashmere throw blanket against the encroaching chill of the evening. The mansion was completely silent, dark, and utterly suffocating. William sat in his leather armchair, staring blankly at the cold fireplace, his hands resting limply on his knees. Melanie curled into a ball on the velvet sofa, her eyes swollen shut from 2 solid days of continuous weeping. Their entire world had completely collapsed. The golden family of Oak Brook was officially destitute, disgraced, and entirely out of options. They were turning on each other. Diane glared at Melanie, her eyes burning with fresh resentment, blaming her daughter's obsession with appearances for their absolute ruin. William glared at Diane, blaming her for failing to monitor the accounts. The heavy, miserable silence was suddenly shattered by a sharp, piercing chime. William jumped in his chair. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He squinted at the bright screen in the dim room. A text message had just arrived from an entirely anonymous, untraceable number. William adjusted his reading glasses, his brow furrowing as he read the short string of text aloud to the silent room. If you want to save your house and avoid federal jail time, come to the Grand Astoria at 7 o'clock tonight. Wear your absolute best suits. William lowered the phone, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The Grand Astoria. It was the most exclusive, hyper-luxurious event venue in the entire city. It was the exact ballroom Melanie had originally booked for Brianna's massive Sweet 16 bash before the deposit bounced and Audrey bought the debt. The three villains stared at each other in the dark, the words hanging in the cold air. The transformation was instantaneous and sickening to witness. The crushing weight of their total defeat vanished, instantly replaced by a surging, toxic wave of absolute arrogance. Diane threw off her cashmere blanket and stood up, her eyes wide with manic excitement. Audrey caved. Diane gasped, a triumphant, wicked smile stretching across her face. I knew it. I absolutely knew it. She could not handle the guilt of ruining her own flesh and blood. She knows the public backlash of throwing us on the street would destroy her precious corporate reputation. William let out a booming, breathless laugh, standing up and aggressively smoothing the wrinkles from his trousers. Of course she caved, William declared, his chest puffing out with unwarranted pride. She probably realized her little revenge stunt went too far. She needs us to sign non-disclosure agreements to protect Apex Hospitality Group from a massive scandal. She is throwing the party to smooth things over. Melanie scrambled up from the sofa, the police investigation completely forgotten in the face of sudden social redemption. My party, Melanie squealed, clapping her hands together. She is actually paying for Brianna's party. She knows I deserve it. She knows Brianna deserves it. Kendrick probably forced her to do it to save his own career. The sheer delusion was entirely staggering. Within seconds, they had completely rewritten the narrative to position themselves as the ultimate victors. Audrey was not a ruthless executive holding all the cards. She was a frightened, guilty relative trying to buy their silence and forgiveness. They had absolutely no intention of showing any gratitude. They were going to walk into that ballroom, demand their house back, demand clear titles to their assets, and force Audrey to apologize in front of all their high society friends. Diane marched toward the grand staircase, clapping her hands sharply. We have exactly 1 hour, Diane commanded, her voice ringing with returning authority. Go to the bags, unpack the designer gowns, get my diamonds. We are not walking into the Grand Astoria looking like charity cases. We are the Addams family. William rushed toward his study to find his tailored tuxedo. Melanie sprinted up the stairs, frantically wiping the smeared mascara from her face and planning exactly which haute couture gown would look best under the ballroom chandeliers. Their monumental arrogance had completely blinded them to the obvious reality of the trap. They dressed to the nines, dripping in stolen diamonds and suffocating entitlement, entirely ready to reclaim their stolen thrones. The ride to the Grand Astoria was suffocatingly tense, yet buzzing with a toxic electric anticipation. William drove his least luxury sedan with reckless speed, gripping the leather steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned a ghostly white. In the passenger seat, Diane was frantically applying a fresh layer of crimson lipstick in the illuminated vanity mirror, her hands trembling with a potent mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated greed. She had draped her heaviest diamond necklace over her collarbones, a desperate attempt to project an aura of untouchable wealth despite the crushing reality of their frozen bank accounts. In the back seat, Melanie had miraculously transformed from a weeping, defeated fraud into a haughty aristocrat. She wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that she had salvaged from her chaotic closet, smoothing the expensive fabric over her knees with a smug, self-satisfied rhythm. The city blurred past their windows, and with every passing mile, their collective delusion compounded into an absolute certainty. They convinced themselves that the anonymous text message was a formal surrender. Audrey had finally realized the immense value of the Addams family name. She was begging for a truce. As William turned onto the Grand Palm-lined boulevard leading up to the venue, their breath caught collectively. The Grand Astoria was a beacon of hyper-luxurious excess. Brilliant, warm golden lights illuminated the soaring neoclassical architecture, casting long, dramatic shadows across the meticulously manicured topiary gardens. A small army of valet attendants in crisp white jackets darted expertly between a steady stream of arriving vehicles, parking gleaming sports cars, and massive armored luxury SUVs. A plush velvet red carpet cascaded down the sweeping marble front steps flanked by heavy brass stanchions and velvet ropes. It was the exact scene Melanie had envisioned for months, the pinnacle of high society extravagance that she believed she inherently deserved. Melanie leaned forward between the front seats, a wicked, triumphant smirk stretching across her freshly powdered face. She reached up and casually wiped away a single lingering tear from her cheek. "See?" Melanie gloated, her voice dripping with sheer condescension and supreme arrogance. "I completely knew she would cave. Audrey knows exactly what her place is in this family hierarchy. She is terrified of the social fallout. She probably begged Kendrick to stay away so she could apologize to us in peace." William threw the sedan into park directly in front of the sweeping marble staircase, entirely ignoring the valet attendant, who approached with an outstretched hand. "We are not tipping these people today," William snapped loudly, shoving the car door open. "Let Audrey cover the gratuity tonight." Diane marched out of the passenger side, lifting her chin and adjusting her diamonds. They moved together as a united, impenetrable front, ascending the red carpet with the heavy, purposeful strides of conquering royalty. They reached the massive, ornate glass double doors, entirely expecting the entire event staff to part like the Red Sea for them right at this very second. Two hulking security guards materialized from the shadows of the arched entryway. They were massive, imposing men wearing tailored black suits and discreet earpieces, their expressions entirely carved from stone. As William reached for the polished brass handle of the right door, the larger of the two guards stepped directly into his path. The guard smoothly crossed his thick, muscular arms over his chest, creating an impenetrable human barricade. "Move aside immediately," William barked, puffing out his chest and attempting to project his usual country club authority. "We are the Addams family. This entire venue is booked under our name. We are here to attend the party for my granddaughter." The security guard did not flinch. He slowly looked down at a digital tablet strapped to his left wrist, scrolling through a highly restricted VIP manifest. He looked back up at William, his gaze completely blank and entirely devoid of any respect. "You are not on the guest list," the guard stated, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that offered absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. Diane let out a sharp, offended gasp. She stepped forward, pointing a manicured finger directly at the man. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to?" Diane shrieked, her voice echoing loudly across the marble portico. "My daughter is the guest of honor. Audrey Wilson arranged this entire evening specifically for us. Open those doors right now before I have you permanently terminated." Melanie pushed her way to the front, her emerald silk gown swishing violently against the stone floor. She was vibrating with furious, unchecked entitlement. "This is my party," Melanie screamed, slamming her palms against the heavy glass panel of the door. "I chose those floral arrangements. I picked out the lighting. You let us inside right this second." The second guard stepped forward, joining his partner to form a solid wall of black wool. "I will only say this once tonight," the second guard warned, placing a heavy hand on William. He physically pushed him back down the top step. "Step away from the doors, or you will be forcibly removed from the property and formally arrested for trespassing." William stumbled backward, his polished dress shoes slipping on the edge of the velvet carpet. Diane grabbed his arm to steady him, her face draining of color as the reality of the situation finally pierced her armor of arrogance. Melanie remained pressed against the doors, refusing to yield. She cupped her hands around her face, pressing her forehead against the thick, reinforced glass to peer inside the brilliantly illuminated grand ballroom. The space was breathtaking, decorated with thousands of cascading white orchids and glittering crystal centerpieces. A live jazz band played softly on an elevated mahogany stage. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne through a crowd of the most elite, powerful executives and philanthropists. But as Melanie scanned the opulent room, she stopped breathing completely. What she finally saw inside shattered her mind entirely into a million tiny pieces. Through the massive reinforced glass panels of the Grand Astoria, the reality of the evening struck William, Diane, and Melanie with the force of a physical blow. The grand ballroom was not decorated for a teenager. The silver balloons and excessive floral walls Melanie had demanded for Brianna were entirely absent. Instead, the space was an elegant masterpiece of understated wealth. Massive velvet banners draped from the vaulted ceiling, bearing the insignia of the Apex Foundation for Youth Empowerment. It was a high-profile charity gala. The room was packed with the highest echelon of society. These were not the mid-level managers and country club gossips William and Diane had spent their lives trying to impress. These were actual billionaires, tech moguls, senators, and international philanthropists. It was a room composed of old money and genuine power. Melanie pressed her hands flat against the cold glass, her breath fogging the pain. Her emerald silk gown felt cheap, a costume worn by an imposter. Diane stood rigid beside her, shivering in the brisk evening wind, her heavy diamond necklaces feeling like a chain around her neck. William simply stared, his jaw slack, as his lifelong arrogance evaporated into the frigid night air. They were locked out of the one room they had sacrificed their souls to enter. In the center of the ballroom, behind a sleek podium on the main stage, was Audrey. She wore a perfectly tailored crimson suit that commanded absolute authority. A massive digital screen behind her displayed the foundation's logo alongside staggering fundraising metrics. She was delivering the evening's keynote speech, her voice projecting through the pristine audio system. Even through the heavy glass doors, the trio could hear the confident cadence of her voice. The elite crowd hung on her every word, their faces reflecting deep admiration and respect. Audrey was not just a guest at this gala. She was the architect. She was the visionary. She was the predator who had conquered a world William could only dream of touching. Diane clutched William's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into his wool tuxedo jacket. "She planned this," Diane whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of raw terror and absolute defeat. "She bought our debts, seized our assets, and used our venue deposit to throw a charity gala. She took everything we had and handed it away to strangers." William could not respond. He watched powerful men he had tried to court for decades nodding enthusiastically at Audrey's words. The magnitude of his miscalculation was paralyzing. He had treated his niece like dirt for years, assuming she would never amount to anything. Now she was ruling the very empire he had bankrupted himself trying to simulate. Melanie, however, was not looking at Audrey. Her eyes darted frantically through the sea of designer tuxedos and evening gowns, desperately searching for the one thing she believed she still owned. "Where is Brianna?" Melanie muttered, her voice rising in panic. "She told us to come here. She sent the text. Where is my daughter?" Her manic gaze swept past the VIP tables, past the silent auction displays, and finally landed near the secondary entrance of the ballroom. Melanie gasped sharply, stumbling backward as if she had been slapped. Brianna was standing near the coat check, but she was not wearing a custom designer gown. She was not wearing a diamond tiara. She was not holding court as the spoiled guest of honor. Brianna was wearing a crisp, simple black uniform. A white apron was tied neatly around her waist. She carried a large silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand, navigating through the crowd to collect empty champagne flutes and distribute fresh water. "No!" Melanie choked out, fresh tears spilling over her ruined makeup. "What is she doing? Why is she wearing that? She is a guest. She is an Addams." But the 15-year-old girl did not look like a victim. As Brianna moved through the room, clearing tables and offering polite smiles to the attendees, something truly shocking became apparent. She looked genuinely happy. For the first time in her life, the heavy, suffocating weight of Melanie's superficial expectations was gone from her shoulders. There was no forced posing, no arrogant sneering, no desperate need to project superiority. Brianna was simply working. She was contributing. She was participating in something real, grounded, and meaningful. When a prominent senator thanked her for water, Brianna offered a warm, authentic smile that Melanie had not seen since her daughter was a toddler. Audrey had kept her promise. She had thrown Brianna a lifeline, and the price of that salvation was hard, honest work. Melanie slammed her fists against the glass again. "Brianna!" she shrieked, her voice muffled by the heavy doors and the roar of the jazz band inside. "Put that tray down right now, look at me." Brianna did not look toward the doors. She remained entirely focused on her task, moving efficiently through the crowd, seamlessly integrated into Audrey's disciplined world. On the stage, Audrey concluded her speech. The entire ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. Billionaires and politicians rose to their feet, applauding loudly as Audrey offered a brief, gracious nod. She gathered her notes from the podium and stepped down the side stairs, shaking a few outstretched hands as she moved through the front tables. Then she stopped. Audrey turned her head, her sharp gaze cutting through the crowded room past the valets straight through the reinforced glass doors. She locked eyes directly with William, Diane, and Melanie. The three of them stood shivering on the cold concrete, wearing their ridiculous stolen finery locked out in the dark. Audrey did not smile. She did not gloat. Her expression was a mask of cold, absolute finality. She handed her notes to an assistant, adjusted her crimson jacket, and began walking directly toward the front glass doors. Her deliberate, rhythmic footsteps seemed to echo in the minds of the shivering family outside. The ultimate reckoning had finally arrived. The glass doors hissed open, slicing the night air. Audrey stepped onto the marble portico, the brilliant warmth of the ballroom spilling out behind her. She did not wear a coat, entirely unfazed by the chill that had Diane shivering in her diamonds. Two massive security guards flanked her instantly, a silent warning. Audrey stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at her family with eyes as cold as the concrete beneath their feet. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the obedient daughter or the overlooked sister. She was an executioner. William surged forward, his face flushed an angry purple. He ignored the guards, his lifelong supremacy blinding him to reality. "What is the meaning of this?" William bellowed, his voice cracking. "We are your parents. You will instruct these animals to step aside and let us in immediately. We are the Addams family and we belong in that room." Audrey did not flinch. She simply looked at him with absolute indifference. The silence stretched, forcing William to absorb the profound uselessness of his commands. Diane stepped up beside him, trying a different tactic. She arranged her face into a mask of wounded maternal pride, reaching a trembling, jeweled hand toward the top step. "Audrey, darling!" Diane cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "This little revenge prank has gone far enough. You have made your point. Now let us inside so we can celebrate together. We forgive you." Audrey tilted her head, a sharp smile touching her mouth. "You forgive me?" Audrey repeated the words, sounding absurd. "You told me to fund a party, Melanie." "So I did. I funded a $150,000 gala. The difference is I threw it for people who actually deserve it. Tonight we raised $2 million for underprivileged youth. We built a new community center. We fully funded 3 college scholarships. I took the money you planned to waste on a vanity project and used it to change actual lives." Melanie pushed past Diane, her emerald gown catching on the edge of a brass stanchion. The charity gala was completely irrelevant to her. Her eyes were wide, manic, and entirely focused on the brief glimpse she had caught of the ballroom interior. She pointed a shaking finger at Audrey. "Give me my daughter back right now!" Melanie screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, shattering the quiet elegance of the venue exterior. "You are completely deranged. You are making her act like a servant in front of the most important people in the city. She is wearing an apron. You humiliated my child." Audrey stepped forward, closing the distance. Her gaze cut through Melanie with lethal, terrifying precision. "I am making her learn the true value of hard work," Audrey stated, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I am teaching her the exact same hard work you mocked and actively avoided your entire life." Brianna came to me. She was exhausted from living in your toxic, superficial delusion. She begged for a way out. She chose to stay with me, and she chose to work tonight. Melanie gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. You kidnapped her? Melanie sobbed, clutching her chest. I will call the police. I will have you arrested for this. Call them, Audrey challenged, not breaking eye contact. The police are already highly familiar with your name, considering the active federal wire fraud investigation currently aimed at your shadow accounts. But before you dial, you should know the rest of my arrangement with Brianna. I set up a comprehensive college trust for her. It covers full tuition, housing, and living expenses at any university she chooses. It is a guaranteed debt-free future. Melanie stopped crying, a sudden flare of greedy hope lighting up her eyes. You set up a trust for her? Melanie asked, instantly calculating how she could access those funds. Audrey saw the calculation and crushed it immediately. Yes, I did, Audrey confirmed smoothly, but it comes with a strict, legally binding condition. The trust activates exclusively on the condition that Brianna completely cuts all financial ties with you and William. If she gives you a single dime, the entire fund dissolves and reverts to the charity you see inside. She signed the paperwork yesterday. You are completely cut off. Melanie let out a guttural, wounded shriek, collapsing onto the cold marble steps. She buried her face in her hands, her emerald silk gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. The realization that she could not exploit her own daughter shattered her final illusion of control. William could no longer contain his fury. He lunged forward, stabbing a finger through the air toward Audrey. You vindictive, ungrateful wretch, William roared, spit flying from his lips. You think you can destroy us? You think you can steal my granddaughter and lock me out of my own life? I demand you halt the foreclosure on my house immediately. You will sign the deeds back over to me, or I will tie you up in court for the rest of your natural life. Audrey stared at the man who had spent 3 decades making her feel small, insignificant, and entirely worthless. She felt absolutely nothing for him. No anger, no sadness, no lingering desire for his approval. He was just a desperate, bankrupt man, shouting in the cold. I cannot halt the foreclosure, William, Audrey said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried perfectly in the night air. Why not? William demanded, his chest heaving. You own the debt. Audrey reached slowly into the inner pocket of her crimson jacket. She pulled out a thick, heavily folded legal document stamped with a bold federal seal. I owned the debt yesterday, Audrey corrected, her tone completely devoid of mercy. But I sold your mortgages, your luxury car leases, and all the outstanding loans on Diane's shadow accounts. I sold every piece of it this morning to the Internal Revenue Service. Audrey held the heavily folded legal document in the frigid night air. The thick parchment snapped sharply in the wind. William stared at it, his face draining of whatever residual color the cold had not already stolen. He reached out with a trembling hand, snatching the paper from her grip. His eyes darted frantically across the bold black text, searching for a loophole, a technicality, a reprieve. There was none. The federal stamp in the corner mocked his lifetime of fabricated superiority. You sold the debt? William repeated, his voice barely a hollow croak. Audrey watched him process the absolute finality of his ruin. The federal investigators seized the accounts this morning, but they needed an authorized entity to process the physical asset liquidation. Audrey stated, her voice slicing through the biting wind with lethal precision. I sold the physical debt to a private liquidation firm an hour ago. They specialize in rapid asset reclamation for uncooperative debtors. You do not have months to fight this in court, William. You do not have weeks to pack. You have exactly 3 days to vacate the premises before they legally change the locks and auction your possessions to the highest bidder. The paper slipped from William's numb fingers, fluttering onto the cold marble stairs. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe implode. The sprawling suburban mansion, the country club memberships, the luxury cars, the endless cycle of pretending to possess a fortune he never actually earned. It was all gone. It had been reduced to a single sheet of paper resting in the dirt. Diane finally snapped. The ironclad facade of high society elegance shattered completely. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail that echoed across the vast, empty courtyard. Diane dropped to her knees on the hard stone, the heavy diamond necklace clattering harshly against her collarbones. The sheer indignity of the position did not register. She was completely broken. Audrey, please. Diane sobbed, crawling forward on her knees until she was mere inches from Audrey's pristine leather heels. She reached up with desperate, grasping hands, clutching at the hem of Audrey's crimson suit jacket. "You cannot do this to us. You cannot throw us out into the street. We have nothing left. We are your blood. I am your mother. Please, my sweet daughter, show us some mercy. We will change. We will do whatever you want. Just give us the house back. Please, my sweet, beautiful daughter." Audrey looked down at the weeping woman clutching her ankles. She did not kick Diane away, nor did she step back. She simply stood there, an immovable pillar of absolute strength, staring at the woman who had spent 34 years making her feel entirely insignificant. Audrey did not flinch. There was no softening in her eyes, no lingering trace of childhood yearning for a mother's affection. "I stopped being your daughter a long time ago," Audrey replied, her tone completely devoid of any emotion. "I stopped being your daughter the exact day you looked me in the eyes and told me I was not family because I would not hand over my hard-earned money to fund a parasite. You made your choice. You chose Melanie's delusions. You chose William's arrogance. You chose to protect a toxic illusion instead of protecting me. You told me that I did not belong. Now you get to live with the reality you constructed." Diane choked on a fresh wave of hysterical tears, her hands sliding helplessly off Audrey's jacket to rest on the cold marble floor. Melanie remained curled in a miserable ball near the brass stanchion, her emerald silk gown stained with dirt, and tears weeping for the college trust she could never touch. William simply stared blindly into the darkness, completely paralyzed by the totality of his disgrace. They were beaten. They were entirely dismantled. There were no more threats to make, no more lies to spin, no more manipulations to deploy. The Addams family empire was nothing but dust blowing in the wind. Audrey adjusted the cuffs of her crimson jacket, smoothing the fabric with slow, deliberate movements. She looked at the 3 ruined figures groveling in the freezing cold, taking one final unblinking inventory of the people who had tried to break her spirit. "You wanted me to pay up so I could stay in the family," Audrey stated, her voice ringing out with supreme, undeniable authority. Her words hung in the crisp night air, a flawless executioner's strike. "I decided I would rather buy the family and dismantle it." Audrey turned her back on them. She did not look over her shoulder. She did not wait for a response. The 2 massive security guards immediately stepped aside, creating a seamless path for her. She walked with powerful, measured strides back up the sweeping marble staircase. As she approached the grand entrance, the heavy reinforced glass doors glided open automatically. The brilliant golden light of the ballroom spilled over her, wrapping her in a warm, triumphant glow. The sound of the jazz band and the cheerful hum of the elite charity gala swelled into the night air, a beautiful symphony of actual, meaningful success. Audrey stepped across the threshold, walking directly back into the magnificent world she had built with her own 2 hands. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind her. The click of the locking mechanism was sharp and final. Outside, the cold wind howled across the sprawling manicured gardens. The camera slowly pulled back, lingering on the devastating tableau left behind on the front steps of the Grand Astoria. Melanie, William, and Diane remained huddled together on the freezing concrete. They were stripped of their stolen wealth. They were stripped of their fabricated status. They were stripped of their sprawling mansion, and they were permanently stripped of their golden child. They were completely, utterly destroyed by their own suffocating greed. The screen slowly faded to a complete and total black void.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines, and when the coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain through every trial.